The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
And off we go on a wet Wednesday. The Orioles are due to play this afternoon against the Kansas City Royals. I don't know if they'll be able to get that in. They did play in the rain last night to some degree, but they're talking about heavy thunderstorms this afternoon, so we'll have to see. Nationals are due to continue their series with the Pittsburgh Pirates. It could be interesting because the Pirates don't open until Friday, and that's where the home opener, I should say, and the Orioles will play in Pittsburgh on Friday with an off day, so maybe there's some finagling to be done, and both teams, the Royals and the Pirates, are going to stay in town for another day tomorrow. But we'll see what happens. It's rain. You start the season in March. You get rain in early April. This is what you deal with. Some cities like Minnesota, I'm sure it's really cold, and you get crowds of 3,000 or 4,000. Is what it is. We're talking a lot about basketball today, once again, as we head towards the Final Four. But we're adding the element, and this is pretty much new to me as a sports radio yacker for well over 30 years, as we're mixing in women's sports and women's basketball because of, and I think it's mainly due to one person, though it has been growing more and more in recent years, but the excitement over the Final Four with Caitlin Clark playing Connecticut, and I know she's bringing her teammates along as well, but Iowa playing Connecticut on Friday at 9 o'clock, that's now looking like must-see TV. And it was not that long ago where I would say if there was a women's basketball game being played in my backyard, I'd close the blinds. But it's not that way anymore. And Caitlin Clark is now being recognized not just as a great women's basketball player, but as a great basketball player. And there are men who are watching her in absolute awe. When it used to be, this is really good entertainment for a game at that level, but, if you put her up against the men, she'd get crushed. Well, it's still the case, but the product that they put on television is great. There was a great game the other night between Iowa and LSU, and I didn't stay up, to be honest, for the second game, but I'm sure that that did very well as well for eyeballs with Connecticut moving on, and now we've got the great matchup here. We've already had one, the LSU-Iowa rematch from the final last year, but Caitlin Clark, that was her dream school, Connecticut. She wanted to go to Connecticut, and Gino Auriemma never really recruited her. She got some calls, or I guess her parents got calls, but there was never really much recruitment there. And so I'm sure she could have walked on as a preferred walk-on, but she had offers, and her family actually wanted her to go to Notre Dame. And she visited, decided that wasn't for her, and stayed at Iowa, and the rest is history. Now, as I said, I'm not some great soothsayer here, but you could see that this was going to be the most watched women's basketball game ever the other night. And in fact, it drew 12.3 million viewers. For the championship game last year, this was just the Elite Eight the other night to get to the Final Four. Championship game last year drew a 9.9. World Series averaged 9.1. This gets 12.3 million viewers, the most watched college basketball game, men's or women's, to air this year on ESPN platforms. Wow. That tells you something. And remember last year, I don't know if it makes a difference anymore, but last year's game was on ABC. I think most people have cable now. But there are, a lot of cord cutters. So theoretically, more available viewers on ABC, and they had 9.9 last year, 12.3 million this year. So the NCAA has signed a contract with ESPN that values the women's tournament at $65 million a year. And that went up 10 times over the previous rate. So women's basketball came to the table with some muscle this time, and they got ESPN to sign up for $65 million. But if there are more Caitlin Clarks that come along, that could prove to be an enormous bargain for ESPN. If you're putting games on and drawing 12.3 million viewers on a multi-year contract at $65 million, that's pretty good. And it was pretty good the other night. Ted Leonsis puffing out his chest once again. He's got a deal done with the district, the unique partnership, as they're calling it. Ted likes that word, partnership. I remember he did that with Bradley Beal last year when he gave him the only guaranteed contract in the NBA. And that proved to be a mess as he had to basically give him away to Phoenix. He got rid of the contract, but that didn't work out. Now the team is actually not helping itself by winning last night because they got 15 wins. They got 2 more than Detroit, so it looks like Detroit will have the most ping pong balls in the hopper. But they did pull a surprise last night by beating Milwaukee. But anyway, back to Ted. He was on CNBC's Squawk Box this morning, squawking about the New Deal, but also, and he's, to his credit, he has been out in front on this, but telling everyone, hey, watch out because women's basketball is coming, and we're going to be right on with them.
Oh, it's certainly the growth stock right now, women's sports. I mean, we've been an advocate. We're one of the longest tenured WNBA owners. We own a piece of the WNBA by owning an NBA team, then by owning the WNBA team itself, and then we participated in the investment at the league level. So we really believe. But I want to go further. What I'd like to do is make Washington, D.C. the capital of women's professional sports. So I could see one day us replicating what we've done at Monumental. And we could have a women's hockey team. We could have women's baseball teams. We could have women's volleyball teams. I mean, I think that whole platform is getting ready to explode.
Well, yeah, but this is typical Ted, running way out in front when it's not quite there. You remember this. When he took over as owner of the Capitals, he had come from AOL and had helped to build them up. I believe it was his idea to send out those original discs, the ones you used to get in the mail, so you would sign up for AOL. He was very instrumental in the growth of that company. There's no question about it. But he also thought, oh, well, since I did that with AOL, I can certainly do this with my hockey team. And he said at one point he was going to use the internet to make the Capitals what the Braves are on cable TV and what they have become over many, many, many years of being on TBS and TNT. Well, it didn't work out that way, and he's often had ideas that he's going to be more out in front than anybody else. So crowing about making Washington, D.C. the capital of women's sports, women's baseball is not going to work here. There was a team. It's ironic that he says that today because actually it was 30 years ago that Coors had a sponsorship of the Silver Bullets. It was a women's baseball team, and it was managed by Phil Niekro. And they didn't play major league teams, but they would play men's like semi-pro teams and were competitive. They had some terrific players. But the league ran its course. It was gone in 4 years. And you'll notice in the 26 years since, there has not been another attempt at that. So let's not get carried away with that. Volleyball, maybe that seems to be growing. It's very, very popular among girls. In fact, many of them are having to decide whether to play volleyball or basketball. That's how big that's become, maybe. But before you say that it's going to become comparable to the men's. He didn't quite say that, but let's realize why this is all happening. It's happening now because of this transcendent player. Caitlin Clark will play a maximum of 2 more college basketball games. Then she goes to the WNBA, and she may be a great thrill to watch in the WNBA. I'm sure she will be. But college basketball is going to need more of these type of players. Now, there's a generation that's grown up, and she's an example of it, watching Steph Curry launch these threes. So there'll be somebody else who can launch threes also. But will they have the passing ability that she has? I mean, she may be just a once-in-a-lifetime type of player. And that's the tidal wave that this is creating here. If we have a tournament next year that doesn't have a Caitlin Clark type of player, will you see these kind of numbers, 12.3 million people watching a women's college basketball game? I think Ted, and it's typical Ted, just to say, well, look at what we're doing, and we understand it better than anybody else, and we're out in front. We're going to make D.C. the capital of women's sports. Well, you got a lot of competition, including the other competition that you create with a hockey team and a basketball team. That hopefully will become a lot more competitive than it is this year. We also have a football team that hopefully is being turned around with new ownership, and the Nationals, who have won a World Series, most recent champion in town, 2019. Hopefully, they're building towards a team that can contend again. The Orioles are right up the road. You got a lot of competition, Ted. So before you jump out in front of the parade and say, look at me, I am the king of women's sports, and we're going to make the nation's capital the women's sports capital of the world, calm down a little bit. People are not going to be flocking to watch women play baseball. People are not going to be flocking to watch women play volleyball. It's nice. It's a great sport. They put it on TV for like the Big Ten network televises games, ACC network, all that. But let's just realize where you are right now. And you just made a fool of yourself with this big waltz with Governor Glenn Youngkin, which blew up in your face. Now you got to deal with the district. You've tried to paint that as this was the best for everybody. It's not what you wanted. And before you go off running with like a chicken with your head cut off about making Washington the nation's capital for women's sports, calm down a little bit. All right, there's a very, very good story today by a regular who's on Tony's show. And in fact, he may be on today, Chuck Culpepper. And he's just a great, great writer. And what he does here is take you inside of what has to be incredible frustration for the coach of Oakland, Greg Kampe, who took NC State to overtime and now looks at NC State as going to the Final Four. This is a guy who's been coaching in pretty much anonymity for 40 years. He's been coaching at Oakland, done a very good job there. You don't usually see that. Guy has some success. He uses the opportunity to get to a bigger school, make more money. He hasn't done that. He's making about $350,000 a year, roughly that. And John Calipari, who he beat in the first round, beat Kentucky, he's making over $8 million a year. He stayed for probably a variety of reasons, including the fact that he really liked it there and still loves what he does. He's 67 years old. There aren't that many guys coaching at that age anymore. The Ulta Cockers have all moved out. Boeheim, Krzyzewski, Williams, they're all gone. And he's still there, and he's there at a school where things are a little bit different. And you could hear the pain in his voice when he lost in the second round to NC State, and how close it was, and how he and I'll get to what Culpepper writes about the agony that he's going through right now. But this was the immediate agony after losing that overtime game to NC State.
It's hard because it's over, right? And it's going to end this way for every team but one in this tournament. The hard part for me is I've done this a long time, and I'm going to tell you, in this day and age of kids leaving and the lack of respect for authority and what about me? What can I make? And all the people telling everybody that's how you should be. The way we're going. To have a team like I had, 15 guys that just cared about each other, 15 guys that just cared about the outcome of the team and the pride they had to be part of a team, and the way they joked and hung around, and every game all through the year, somebody else it was, nobody cared who it was. They just were glad that we were together. When things went bad, we picked each other up, and then we won games, and close games after close games. I guess it ends with a close loss, but it was just a joy in this day and age to walk into the office every day and know that I'm lucky I get to go in that gym and be with this group of kids. And that's probably what hurts the most right now, is I know that that's over. And, man, I'm going to miss that.
And that was a week ago Friday when they lost to NC State. And Culpepper in his story picks it up a few hours later from there. Dateline, Auburn Hills, Michigan, in the secluded throes of March Madness at 4 a.m. Pittsburgh time on the Sunday of the first weekend, a youthful 68-year-old coach with fresh agony flashing through his brain sat alone in an 8-seat conference table in a hotel suite and cussed repeatedly at himself. He held a pad with a basketball court diagram and jotted down play after play that might have worked. The one hours prior hadn't. He sat wretched with lament until the morning light peeked in and texted his sister. "Can I come back with you?" he typed, having learned during the pandemic that traveling separately from his team eased the strain on everyone involved. "I'm leaving at 7. Can you be ready?" she replied. "I'm ready right now," he replied. Then Greg Kampe, coach of the utmost darling of the 2024 NCAA men's basketball tournament, Oakland University of Michigan, left the gladness and meanness of March Madness. He left in the back seat with Sister Karen driving and 2 friends also riding. For the 4 hours they rolled along, he said, there couldn't have been more than 4 words said. He arrived at his condo. His dogs greeted him, and then said that he spent time thinking about that he screwed up those last 17 seconds. He switched on the tournament games he would not watch, sprawled on the couch at noon, slept all the way until 10 the next morning. He might have eaten something he can't recall. And, he's got to be even worse for him watching NC State and saying that could have been us, because this is Oakland. These things don't come along every year. If you're Kentucky, if you're Duke, if you're North Carolina, you're supposed to be in a position to get to the Final Four every year. He's probably seen the last possible chance that that's going to happen at the age of 68. That's not going to happen. And as he beats himself up and he talks about it, he says, I've got to live with this the rest of my life. It's just I can't let it go, and I know it's going to haunt me. So as his sleeps began stalling on multiple nights through the week, as he would wake up and draw up more plays, as it echoed the years of waking up and shaking after dreams replaying tormenting overtime defeat to the number 1 Michigan State in December 2015, when a winning layup in regulation danced on the rim and fell off, the 2024 tournament continued and chucked a further tangle atop the churn. By Sunday, at the Midwest Region Final in Detroit between Purdue and Tennessee, he did a radio spot, and soon Tennessee fans surrounded him for chatter and thanks. When he ventured into the pregame locker rooms, and coaching friends Matt Painter and Rick Barnes, the man who ushered him, wound up saying, I feel like I'm walking Mickey Mouse around Disneyland. By Monday, Kampe saw a woman on X riding around with her friends with a life-size Kampe cardboard cutout rising through the sunroof. And this is how he concludes the story for Culpepper here. He says, could we have done what NC State did? Oh, my God. The wave of momentum is a magical thing in sports. He imagines Golke splashing down 10 more threes in the Sweet 16 because daydreams don't permit 0 for 10s. He reckons on NC State's title could once bolster and tantalize at once. Mostly, though, he dwells on 17 deathless seconds. I think about that nonstop, that we didn't get a shot. He senses less tortured days await somewhere in the future calendars. I know it's out there. I definitely know it's out there. He wonders if euphoria might surpass regret at last, maybe in the middle of summer, one day on the golf course. It's just, for now, he lies on the pillow, thinks of loop kick, draws on his pads, and embodies the woe always lurking in the intolerable, irresistible art of coaching. That captures that beautifully. And that's not a view we usually get. These Cinderellas, they come along and they win their first round games like he did, and then they get overmatched in the second game. He didn't. He had an opportunity to knock off what is the Cinderella of this year, but it's a team from a big conference, the ACC. And if you're not in the NCAA tournament on a regular basis, they fire you. He doesn't have that at Oakland. So this was his one shining moment that could have shined on. And he looks at what is going on now, 2 weeks after his team is out, and thinks, yeah, could have been me to the Final Four. Look, Jim Larranaga, not that Kampe is looking to do what Larranaga did. Larranaga, I think, was in his early 50s when George Mason made it to the Final Four. But he got himself to a big-time program in Miami and did very well there, got them to a Final Four last year. That's not to say that's Kampe's dream. It's just that he's a mid-major lifer, and he had his one close opportunity. And now for the rest of his life, he's going to say, God, what did I do? I called the wrong play. I called the timeout at the wrong time. Whatever it is, he didn't handle the last seconds of regulation like he wanted to, and his team lost to NC State, and he's living with that for the rest of his life. You can really feel the agony in this story, and it's really well done by Chuck Culpepper. Coming up, Jay Wright with some thoughts on the tournament, on the Final Four. He's been to a bunch of them, won a couple of national titles. He talked yesterday on the Rich Eisen show about what NC State could do and what Purdue is up against. We'll get to that more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We do have a Tony Show at 11 o'clock. We may have an Orioles game this afternoon, depending on the weather. It's a 1 o'clock start against Kansas City. Brett Hollander, part of the broadcast team, is going to join us for Orioles preview coming up at 10:30. If the odds makers are right, we're going to have a really boring Final Four until we get to the championship game, I guess, because UConn is a double-digit favorite over Alabama, and you also have Purdue as a double-digit favorite over NC State. But this is the NCAA tournament, and NC State back in for the first time since they were a Cinderella 41 years ago. Wow, 1983 with the Jimmy Valvano team that won it all. So you never count them out. They're an 11th seed. They're playing a number one. They're playing a team that has been on the verge, they thought, the last couple of years of winning it, but have choked that away, losing to St. Peter's and Fairleigh Dickinson over the last 2 years. But they're in the Final Four, and they have looked very, very good along the way. Zach Edey has looked unstoppable. And as much of a fascination as there has been with DJ Burns, he's given up quite a few inches. He's 6'9", Edey's 7'4", and he's got really better players around him than Burns does. But you never know. And that's what has made this tournament so great over the years, is the incredible upsets that have happened along the way, which is why Jay Wright, who's won a couple of national titles at Villanova, but has also gone out early as a favorite, has great perspective on this tournament. And here's his take on what he sees in NC State.
No matter what I see in NC State, I cannot count them out, because there is a magic that happens at this time of year. Villanova did it. Villanova was an 8 seed in 1985, an 8 seed, and played the first round in Dayton against Dayton and was out of the game and came back and won it. So in the first round, you're like, all right, Villanova's eliminated. They were an 8 seed. They shouldn't have been in the tournament anyway. And came back to beat Georgetown in the national championship game, which was as dominant with Patrick Ewing as UConn looks right now. So I know enough not to count out NC State and not to count out Alabama. But the Alabama story too, Nate Oates is a guy that I have communicated with, because if you remember, Javon Quinterly transferred from Villanova to Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And we were helpful in that situation. It was just a good move for Javon, and Nate was great with him, and we tried to help him get eligible. So we worked with Nate on it, and we become friends. And I know, talking to him during the year, he's like, I got to get these guys to defend. Like, we're a great offensive team, but I got to get them to defend better. And what you're really seeing with them is a coach that has never given up on trying to get them to defend, and even into the tournament kept trying to teach them and demand of them, where in the game against Grand Canyon, they held Grand Canyon scoreless for the last 4 minutes of the game. And really, in the Duke game, their defense was the difference. They held Duke in the 50s. So this is a great story of a coach that never relented and continued to demand of his team to defend, while they were one of the best offensive teams ever in college basketball.
So that'd be a stunner for sure if NC State can pull it off against Purdue. And, if Alabama can get by Connecticut, watch out. But Connecticut looks unbeatable at this point. Danny Hurley was on with Dan Patrick yesterday. We'll play some of his conversation in the 10 o'clock hour. Meantime, more from Wright as he was talking to Jimmy Jackson, who's quite good, by the way, former NBA player, does color commentary, Big Ten Network, does a lot of games. So he was filling in for Rich Eisen yesterday and did an excellent job as a host and in talking to Jay Wright. And he talked to Wright about his own experiences and how it relates to Purdue, as Villanova has gone in. For a long time, they had a reputation as a choker. They had a reputation for getting to the tournament with a great record and going out early. And he finally was able to shed that and win a couple of national titles. So this was right on what he sees in Purdue and how it relates to his own experience coaching all those years at Villanova.
We were a number 1 seed 2 years in a row. In 14, I believe it was 14, you help me if I'm wrong, but we lost to Connecticut in the second round. And Connecticut was like, I don't know, man, I think they were like an 11 seed or something like that. And we lost in the second round. They went on to win the national championship. The next year, we were a number 1 seed again. We might even have been the number 1 overall seed. And we lost to NC State, who was an 8 seed in the second round. And at the time, you don't realize it, but when you're in the middle of it, I felt like everybody was just killing us. I felt like everybody was, and it probably wasn't as bad as I felt it at the time, but I've actually talked to Matt about this. You feel like everybody just thinks you stink and you can't coach, and they criticize the players and you're losers. And it was 2 years in a row. In 2016, we went to play Iowa in the second round game, and I feel for Matt, because I felt like the whole season of 15-16, and we would talk to our team about this, to everybody else, that whole season didn't matter. And we won the Big East championship regular season. We actually lost in the finals, similar to Purdue, in the Big East tournament. But nobody cared. I felt like nobody cared about anything we did they just wanted to see us get to that second round game and get past it. That's all anybody cared about. And our second round game was in Brooklyn, and we played Iowa, and Iowa was this hot team, one of the best offensive teams in the country. And I'm telling you, honestly, I was nervous as hell going to this game. I was acting in front of my team like it was no big deal. But I remember seeing my president before the game, and my president saying, I have never been so nervous before a game in my life. He said, I don't really care if we win or lose, but I just want everybody to get off your back. And the amazing thing to me was our players had no fear. Ryan Archidiakono was a senior. Daniel Chefa was a senior. They had no fear at all. It was kind of like Brian Dutcher going into the UConn game saying, I'm intimidated. When I watch film, I'm intimidated, but I know my players aren't. And I found the same thing with our players. They went into that game. We were up 30. We were up 30 in that game. Our guys were so confident, so aggressive. But once we got past that second round, it was like the weight of the world was off our shoulders, and we could just play. And every other game after that was so enjoyable and gave us a freedom, a mental freedom that allowed us to win a national championship, I think. So I think going through it, getting past the second round, actually gave us a clear mind and a freedom on a path to a national championship that I think Purdue is enjoying right now. And I think it's going to be amazing. There's a fan in me wants to see that matchup against UConn.
I think most people do want to see the big men bang into each other, and Klingon and Edey, and see what happens as the tectonic plates shift when they get under the basket. Now, to the point that he's making about the second round and getting past that, remember, Purdue didn't even get to the second round last year. They lost. They were the second team in history to lose to a 16 seed, Virginia being the first, but Virginia came back the following year to win the national title. And maybe Purdue is on the same path, but the point that Jay Wright makes about that second round, Purdue didn't have any trouble with Montana State in the first round. They won by 28. But in the second round, when you're thinking, okay, if we don't get to the second weekend, we have really wasted the career of Zach Edey here. He's a two-time player of the year, and we're going to go out. Well, just to make sure, they took care of Utah State 106-67. I mean, they obliterated them. And Gonzaga, which is a good team, and Gonzaga looked really good in beating Kansas, though Kansas was a little beat up this year, but they beat them easily. They beat them 80-68, and then took care of Tennessee and did a really good job at the end of that game, got a close game. And I think you do need a close one along the way, and that's maybe kind of the point about NC State too. The Cinderella run that they made in '83, they were supposed to go out to Pepperdine in the first round, and as Wright said, a lot of fouling put them in a position to come back and win that game. Maybe the scare for NC State was Oakland, but Oakland proved to be a good team in beating Kentucky. But having to go to overtime against Oakland may have toughened them up so that they're able to beat Duke, and we'll see what happens once they get on the court against Purdue on Saturday night. But really interesting to hear the perspective of Jay Wright, who, probably should have been the Maryland coach. The story that was told, and he's never confirmed that as far as I know, but when Gary Williams retired after the 2010-2011 season, he thought he had a chance to get to the Final Four in 2010 and might have, were it not for just a bizarre play at the end of the Michigan State game where he got beat on a buzzer beater. And if they had won that, there's a pretty good chance they would have won their next 2 games and gotten to the Final Four the way things were lining up that year. And he came back and coached one more year, 2010, 2011. Things didn't go the way he wanted them to. He was ready to go, and at 68, he retired. And as the story has been told, and again, no confirmation on this, Jay Wright was the first choice. And Wright reportedly said, look, I will take the job if it's offered to me. I don't want to interview for the job. I don't want to be considered for the job and not get it, and then I have to go back to Villanova. Again, that's secondhand, so we don't know if that conversation actually took place. But you just think, because that was before Jay Wright won his first title. So he comes to Maryland, and Mark Turgeon, I think, took a lot more criticism than he deserved. Did he produce what was hoped? No, he got to one Sweet 16. But get Jay Wright here, it would have been just spectacular, as it turned out. I mean, you years later, you'd have moved heaven and earth to get Jay Wright. At that point, he was, as he said, a team that had underachieved in the NCAA tournament. They come in with these high seeds, and they get knocked out early. Nobody at Maryland wanted that. They tried to get Sean Miller from Arizona. There were some questions about how he wanted to handle things academically that they didn't like, and so they made the decision to go with Turgeon. And here we are with Kevin Willard now as the coach, coming off a terrible year, and we'll see what happens next year. I use this term that I heard in college many times, figures don't lie, but liars figure. I was just looking at this story about Carson Wentz winding up in Kansas City as the backup for Patrick Mahomes. And, not that he's a bad choice for that. He finished last year with the Rams. He did not perform well as a starter here. He performed actually pretty well when he was in Indianapolis. He just had a terrible last game where he was just awful, and they had to beat a bad Jacksonville team to get in the playoffs and couldn't do it. So that's why he wound up here. And now he's probably going to finish out his career as a backup. But his numbers, if you just look at these Carson Wentz numbers, they're tantalizing. He's thrown for 22,000 yards, 153 touchdowns, 67 interceptions. Now, the eyeball test tells you he's not good anymore. But the numbers tell you, wait a minute, why isn't this guy being considered for a starting quarterback? And, the way injuries happen, he may wind up being a starting quarterback. And if things pan out for him in Kansas City under Andy Reid, maybe he has a career resurgence. What is he, like 31, right? 31 years old. He's 2016 draft, so that's 8 years ago. So he's about 30, right? About 30 years old. There could be something left in him. Not that he would be showing the promise that he showed in his second year in Philadelphia when he was on his way to the MVP and got hurt as the Eagles were making their way to the playoffs, and Nick Foles was the one who turned out to be the Super Bowl MVP. But numbers pretty good, and he just wasn't good here, and that turned out to be you wonder about this too. Just thinking out loud here, if they don't start Carson Wentz in that Cleveland game where they get eliminated from the playoffs, if they go back to Taylor Heineke, who had been benched in the previous game against a great San Francisco defense. And their defense was awesome. And his offensive line wasn't very good. He got beat up. He threw a couple of picks, or maybe not even a couple, one pick. And they benched him. And they put in Wentz, and Wentz didn't win the game, but they thought he played well enough to get the start the following week against Cleveland. If they go back to Taylor Heineke, and Heineke beats Cleveland, and Cleveland was beatable because Wentz was just terrible that day, and they get in the playoffs, I don't think Ron Rivera is still the coach of this team, but it just set up a stage going into last year with new ownership that it was just never going to work out. And not that they were going to re-sign Taylor Heineke, but sometimes one game can make that much of a difference. It did for Kirk Cousins here, because Kirk Cousins was not going to be brought back. They would not have put the franchise tag on him if he didn't have that great you like that game against Tampa where he came from 24 down to win. So sometimes it can hinge on that. But just thinking out loud about Carson Wentz. No other reason than I just looked at the story. Coming up, this could be instructive for us as Kansas City voters have said no to a tax which the Chiefs say could be instrumental in whether or not they stay in town or not. Believe it or not, the team that's won 3 of the last 4 Super Bowls. Some stuff going on there that might be worth taking a look at as we hope for a new stadium here in D.C. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Well, we got Orioles preview coming up at 10:30 today, and weather permitting, we'll have Orioles baseball this afternoon as they close out the series against the Royals, scheduled for 1 o'clock pregame, 12:30 here on ESPN 630. Another baseball note, and this is so funny. The Yankees have a new pitcher. Now, he's been in the majors for a while. He's pitched with Milwaukee, has pitched a total of 51 games for them over the last 3 years. So it's not like, it's the first time we've seen him. And he was actually drafted by the Nationals in 2017, 20th round of the draft. That's pretty deep. Most guys don't make it to the majors from that spot, but he did. And his name is Cousins, and he's the cousin of Kirk Cousins. And if you want to Google him, he looks just like Kirk Cousins. He's his doppelganger. Jake Cousins is his name. Yankees picked him up in trade with the White Sox for cash and considerations over the weekend. He's a right-handed relief pitcher. And Kirk Cousins tweeted out, "Yes, indeed, that is my cousin." So at some point, we may have to put them together and see if we can fool some people. If you're old enough to remember the old Patty Duke show, where Patty Duke played a dual role in that sitcom, but she had a cousin, identical cousin, as you like. She came from England, and so Patty Duke played a dual role. She played her cousin and herself, and they used whatever technology was available then. I don't think it's quite that close, but if you look at the pictures of the two of them, Kirk Cousins and his relief pitching cousin, Jake Cousins, you go crazy with cousins and lookalikes on that. Also on baseball, Bob Uecker is still doing the Brewers games. He is 90 years old. And, you think of Uecker for a variety of other things besides his baseball play-by-play on the radio. You think of him for the great, Miller Lite commercials, from the front row, and he did television series like Mr. Belvedere. He's one of the all-time great talk show guests. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but you don't think of him in the same way you think about Vin Scully. And Scully did 65 years with the Dodgers, and other than cameos on Mr. Ed or shows like that, he really didn't stray that far from being a baseball broadcaster. Uecker's done a whole bunch of other things, and he's stand around funny. He did 15 minutes at his Hall of Fame speech, which was hysterical, just hysterical. Just one of the funniest people, never mind funniest people in baseball, funniest people. He was like Johnny Carson's favorite guest. He'd sit down on the chair next to Johnny and crack him up for 15 minutes, just riffing. He didn't have any notes or anything like that. He just did. So he is now starting his 54th season. He's only doing home games now. I don't think you discredit him for that at the age of 90. But he got a standing ovation last night. They showed his face and name on the video board. And it was the first game he'd called since the Brewers went to the postseason last year. He started his career with the Brewers in 1971. Now, the team started out as the Seattle Pilots. They moved to Milwaukee in 1970. So a year later, he becomes their broadcaster. And with all the stuff that he was doing, I don't know how many games he missed over the years, but probably not many. He's always said that this is his first love. And he's continuing to do games. Scully retired at 89. He's 90. And despite his age, he does not have any immediate plans to retire. The Brewers have given him the option to broadcast fewer games. He's done just the home games, but it doesn't sound like he's ready to step away from that anytime soon. And he says he's just taking it one day at a time. And within the last 5 years, maybe, certainly within the last 5, I was in the press box for Nationals-Brewers game, and I saw him, just like anybody else, getting his little ice cream before the game or, his little hot dog or whatever it was. He was in the press room with everybody else, and he's a big star. I think there are a lot of people who have watched Bob Uecker over the years who have no idea that he's a baseball broadcaster. That he's 54 seasons doing the Brewers. And most fans of television, Maybe baseball fans have a sense of that. But the fact that he's been doing this all these years, and I'm sure financially doesn't have to do it, but just loves it and has made a living making fun of his baseball career. He's the antithesis of the star who goes into the broadcast booth. He ain't Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer's in the Hall of Fame. Bob Uecker's in the Hall of Fame, but as a broadcaster. And you just look at his career and what he has done, and we celebrated Scully for 65 years and should have, because Scully's probably the best to have ever done it. But Uecker has kind of flown under the radar and one of the great broadcasters of all time in 54 years. Just absolutely remarkable. Charlie Slows, I guess, is now in is it 20 years now for the Nats? Yeah, I guess this is season number 20. So he's been doing them since day one. Dave Jagler came in the second year. That's a long run for two guys. Announcers change more often than not. Ernie Harwell, one of the greatest to ever do it. I don't know how many years he did the Tigers, but it was not anywhere close to 50. And he got fired once, and they brought him back. So remarkable run for Bob Uecker. This story may hit a little bit close to home. I'm not sure exactly how the local politics work, but there was a vote put up, a measure put up for sales tax that would fund the downtown ballpark for the Kansas City Royals and major renovations to Arrowhead Stadium. And it was voted down by the taxpayers. Royals owner John Sherman and Chiefs president Mark Donovan acknowledged long before the vote was taken that it would fail. More than 58% of voters ultimately rejected the plan, which would have placed 3/8 of a cent sales tax that they have been paying for the upkeep of the Truman Sports Complex, the home of more than 50 years, to Kauffman and Arrowhead stadiums, with a similar tax that would have been in place for the next 40 years. Royals, they're saying they're going to kick in $1 billion. It's funny, you hear these numbers. It used to be $1 billion for a stadium? When Jerry Jones was building Jerry World, it's going to top $1 billion? This is a baseball stadium. They're kicking in $1 billion. Remember when the big fight went on? It's 20 years now, but the fight that went on, led by Linda Kropp of the City Council of D.C., that they weren't going to pay for Nats Park and therefore could jeopardize the possibility of the Expos moving to town. It ultimately got worked out, but I think the number there was $480 million. This is $1 billion that the Royals are putting in, and they're looking for another billion plus from the area, from the city, and the tax revenue would help create the difference. It would cost more than $2 billion to build this ballpark. The Chiefs, they're kicking in $300 million, but they want to do an $800 million overhaul of Arrowhead Stadium. Now, when I heard what the Commanders are doing, what Josh Harris is doing, he's spending $75 million to fix up FedEx Field. That's just for a temporary hold. That's for the next 4 or 5 years until they can hopefully get a new stadium built. This would be for the longer haul, but $800 million. And you would think it's Jefferson County is where they're located. You would think that a team that has won 3 of the last 4 Super Bowls would, have enough clout to get this through. But that's not what is happening. The Chiefs are saying they'll do what is in the best interest of the organization moving forward. Could that be that they flirt with other jurisdictions? The current lease at Truman Sports Complex lasts through January 31st, 2031. The Royals do not want to play there beyond the 2030 season. The Chiefs are hopeful of staying at Arrowhead Stadium, but if they can't get these improvements through, I don't think they're going to move to another city. But anything could be in play, and what we've seen in the NFL, where the Cleveland Browns, an iconic franchise, moved to Baltimore. The Raiders keep moving. They moved from Oakland to Los Angeles, back to Oakland, and now to Las Vegas. It could happen. The Royals moved from Municipal Stadium. Remember Municipal Stadium? That's where the Redskins played a couple games there over the years, and then they opened Arrowhead Stadium in 1973 with Kauffman Stadium. It was renovated from 2009 to 2012, and Arrowhead was renovated about the same time. But just kind of instructive to look at that and say, what is this going to mean for a stadium in D.C.? You talk to various people, and I think most of the fan base would like to see it happen in D.C. And what Ted Leonsis just went through with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia would seem to slam the door shut at any possibility of the team moving to Virginia, and certainly not to the Potomac Yard site. So that you take that out. Now you go, well, the city is kicking in $515 million for Ted, for the Caps and the Wizards to stay at Capital One. Could you come up with, and the number that I read was $1 billion. It would take the city $1 billion to help to fund a new stadium on the RFK site for the Commanders, which is what everybody wants. Is that going to happen? And talks are ongoing. As Josh Harris said at the where was that? Was that at the was it Combine? He said it might have been at the Combine, where he said we're watching very carefully what is happening with the Wizards and the Caps. So I think he meant by if that doesn't happen, because at that point they had not made the deal with the district to stay. He thought, yeah, okay, if they go, their leverage obviously increases. That the city can't now have just one team, just can't have the Nationals, and can't let the Commanders stay in Maryland or some long shot play in Virginia. Now that the hockey and the basketball team are here for the long haul, what does that mean for the hopes of seeing Washington, get the Commanders, which is what I think most people want, and it's going to be a difficult deal to pull off. Whatever happens, there's going to be a lot of back and forth on this, and there's going to be a lot of grandstanding of people. What are we paying $1 billion for a football team? The problem with staying in Maryland is it's never been good for access. The plan would be to build the stadium closer to the Morgan Boulevard subway station, but I have heard that's not going to be, even if they do that, it's going to be closer, but it's not going to be anywhere near what it is the subway station from RFK. Like, you walk off that subway to RFK and you look up and you see the stadium right there. The Morgan Boulevard wouldn't be quite the same as that. And it would be more difficult to get to the stadium. Now I'm told it's about a 25-minute walk if you're walking from the subway to the game at FedEx Field. Some people do it, but there's that. And then when the weather gets bad, they supposedly have shuttle buses, and maybe this will improve under the new ownership. But that was a problem too, is that the shuttle buses weren't running often enough, and people were getting stuck, and so that all has to be worked out. The one other quick thing on the Wizards last night. You saw what happened. That they beat the Bucks 117-113, and Adam Silver was out in front before anybody else talking about legalizing sports betting for the NBA. How can you bet on the NBA? How can you do that? The lineup that started. Let me get the box score here. The lineup that started for the Wizards last night, it doesn't seem like it could be competitive with anybody. Now, Damian Lillard did not play for Milwaukee. Okay, but Antetokounmpo had 35. Middleton had 24. They had the squad. The Wizards started Denny Advia, Anthony Gill, Marvin Bagley III, Corey Kispert, who had a great night, 27 points, Vujovic, who they just got, played over in Europe, and this guy, Jared Butler, who's been playing like garbage time. He had 17 off the bench. Go figure. How does that happen? How do the Wizards win that game? It should not happen. They should. Milwaukee has the best record in the East. Even with the loss, they're 47-28. The Wizards are 15-61. So I just don't know. I just don't know how you do it. I know people do it, and that's why that there is risk involved in any bet that you make. But that one would seem like, whoa. Now maybe you take the points. If you took the Wizards and the points, maybe that made some sense. But man, if you're going betting straight up, crazy. Let's move on to Connecticut and whether or not they can be beaten. They are a double-digit favorite to win this first of the Final Four games against Alabama. And I would assume, even if Purdue takes care of NC State easily, they'll be favored to beat Purdue. And it should be a great matchup of the big men with Klingon and Edey going head-to-head. This is Danny Hurley, the coach, on yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show. And if you don't know, Bill Murray's son is an assistant coach at Connecticut, Luke Murray. And Bill hangs around, Hey, Bill, that's like Bill's entree into major college basketball. And this is Hurley talking to Dan Patrick about what apparently a hoop head Bill Murray is.
Every time you meet him, I think he's in a different, his personality's maybe in like a different place. Sometimes he's funny, sometimes he's super laid back. Sometimes he's fired up for the game. I was surprised how much film he watched with us last year during the March and April run. I was surprised that he loves ball that much. He was watching like 6 or 7, San Diego State games.
Wait. He's in film with you?
He was last year in Houston, and rumor has it I'm superstitious, so I was surprised that I let him stay in the room because he had never been in there, and usually I'm trying to remove newcomers, especially when it's going good. But he's such a big star, and Luke's been so critical to my success. I don't want to throw his dad out.
Yeah, Luke, Bill's son, is an assistant with Danny. But, this whole idiosyncrasy, superstition, have you seen somebody for it?
I've been bounced around. No one's consistently kind of kept me under their care. I think that once they start to, hear about all these things stacking up, they lose. I'm like a hopeless cause, I guess, for them. I find it to be, I don't know. I look at it like, was it like Steve Jobs would wear like a jeans and a white shirt, or it's like I don't have to make that many decisions about what to do because a lot of my superstitions just kind of line me up to the game. Like I don't have to pack or figure out what I'm packing for this trip because I'm bringing the same exact stuff that I brought to New York for the Big East tournament, that I brought to Brooklyn for the first 2 rounds, that I brought to Boston for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. So the positive part is I don't have to make a lot of decisions. I just bring everything I brought.
Your wife doesn't go crazy with this?
She's half Greek. She's half Italian. She's from Jersey. Her parents were born in Jersey City. Like if there was one person on earth that was absolutely made to love and manage me and to keep me upright and functioning at a high level, it's Andrea Hurley.
And they have 2 boys. One of them plays for Dad as a walk-on. I just thinking about Bill Murray being in the room as they're watching tape, and Hurley's trying to make a point, and he's ripping his team, and Bill Murray makes some kind of a wisecrack. How does Hurley react to that? I'm kind of surprised, even though Bill Murray's a big star, that he doesn't say to Luke, hey, I love your dad, makes me laugh on TV, makes great movies, but you can't have him in here. So either I can do it and be the bad guy, but I prefer if you would gently say to him, I don't want you in there. But I guess, as intense as he is, he's got enough of the broader sense of everything to say, okay, Bill Murray's in here. And maybe Murray assured him, look, this is your team. I'm just here to watch. I'm here to learn. I'm really into college basketball. I want to support my son, and I won't say a peep. Maybe that happened. I just, would Bobby Knight, not that he'd necessarily hire Bill Murray's son, but somebody in that type of personality, would he allow that kind of thing to happen? Would he allow Bill Murray to sit in on his tape session? More from Hurley, and this is on meeting Kim Mulkey, the coach at Baylor. And it happened, I guess, last year after both of them had won national titles. There was a dinner between the two of them, and apparently they connected. Here's what Danny Hurley was able to observe about Kim Mulkey.
She's intense. She got at my neck, man. I wasn't. I knew her. I knew of her. I knew her. The whole deal, all of her success, but. It hit me like a tidal wave when I met her. She was intense.
But how did it surprise you? I mean, you've seen her before when she coaches.
Yeah, but generally when people meet me, they say, or at least my wife tells me, that her friends always say, I thought I didn't think he'd be normal. He seems like a pretty normal guy away from his work. And in just regular settings, but I didn't see that with Coach.
She had no off switch, is what you're saying?
Not that night.
But do you ever have your dad or your wife who might say, hey, slow down or calm down, or anybody sort of the lifeguard on duty with you?
Yeah, I think, me and Bob, my dad doesn't have credibility because he modeled being a monster most of my life. So like that's do what I say, not as I did type of situation. Bob, I think me and Bob try to talk each other off the ledge, so to speak. But the weird thing about us is like we're never both down or up at the same time. So it's like when one of us is playing well, the other one's struggling. So, but we support each other. It has to be my mom, not my mom, my wife, and then my agent sometimes will step in if if I'm over the top, obviously getting into it with fans on the way out of arenas or maybe too much with the referees, then the agent will come in and say, hey, you're going too far.
We're talking to Dan Hurley, Connecticut head basketball coach. Wait a minute, your dad was a model monster on the sidelines? Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, he used to go up in there if people were yelling at him and, flipping him off or, catcalling him. I've witnessed on more than one occasion, at least 2 or 3 hard steps into the bleachers. I've never seen him, yoke someone up, but, my dad is one of the greatest coaches of his generation. I mean, he was a master, and he mastered as many things as possible, but his intensity is absolutely legendary.
Yeah, there's documentaries that have been made about Bob Hurley. Incredible. As for Kim Mulkey, she's gotten some criticism, and some of it deserved. She took off on the Washington Post about a story that was pretty neutral. There really wasn't much to complain about there. And she did complain about the LA Times story, and they retracted some of the stuff that they put in there. Maybe she's taken too much heat. I don't know. But she's done a great job wherever she's been, and she led LSU to the national title. Well, the idiot governor of Louisiana has weighed in from what happened the other night, not on the game that they lost to Iowa, but because Kim Mulkey did not have her team on the floor when the national anthem played, the governor, Jeff Landry, is asking to punish the players who are not on the floor for that, and has even suggested that their scholarships be pulled. This is a matter of respect that all collegiate coaches should have. He said, my mother coached high school women's basketball during the height of the desegregation. No one has a greater respect for the sport and for Coach Mulkey. However, above respect for the game is a deeper respect for those that serve to protect us and unite us under one flag, he put out on Twitter. And Mulkey says, wait a minute, I didn't know we were supposed to be out there when this is our routine to be in the locker room. At that time, we were not out on the floor. And she didn't intend any kind of a protest or anything. She said, honestly, I don't even know when the anthem was played. We kind of have a routine when they're on the floor and they come off at the 12-minute mark. I don't know. We come in and do our pregame stuff. I'm sorry. Listen, that's nothing intentional. And according to the reporters who follow them throughout the season, they're never on the floor for the national anthem. And you know what? They don't have to be. That whole thing, you know how that started? And it became such a lightning rod for when the Colin Kaepernick controversy was going on and whether players should be allowed to kneel and all that stuff. This goes back to 9/11. This is almost 25 years ago. So when 9/11 happened, the NFL recognizes they took a week off, and then they came back, and they realized that patriotism was good for business. And the enormous flag would be unfurled on the field, and the teams were required. This was new because in the past, if you look at games from prior to 2001, teams were not on the field for the national anthem. They were not. But they then required them to be out there. My feeling is if you don't want to be out there, you shouldn't have to be out there. Iowa was out there. Okay, good for them. But to make this what this is now, a political football for this idiot governor, Jeff Landry. I mean, stop. This is what you got to worry about? You're worrying about your team that played in the Elite Eight from your state school that the players weren't out on the court for the national anthem and you want to revoke scholarships because of that? What a dope. What a complete dope. Just stop. And I would like to see the NFL go back to the old way that teams will not be on the field for the national anthem. I don't think, and there are some who say, and I don't necessarily disagree with them, but some who say we just ought to do away with singing the national anthem at games because it becomes so dividing, so divisive. I would say it's the one place where people do get together and sing it, and I like the tradition, standing up for the national anthem before a game. But I don't think it should be about this. This is ridiculous. It's just and you're doing it to your own team. Come on, and this is going to make you look good in the eyes of the voter because you're ripping your local basketball team, your state basketball team, playing at a very high level and playing very well and attracting a record audience, helping to attract. Come on, stop. Stop with that. All right, we'll do Orioles preview coming up next. Brett Hollander, part of the Orioles broadcast crew, will join us, and we'll also ask him about a tradition for home runs, a new celebration that the Orioles have come up with. We'll see if it sticks. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.